Okay, we're going to look at writing a sine and cosine equation for this curve. The first question to address is this a sine curve or is this a cosine curve? A lot of you probably say, well, it's a sine curve. It goes to the origin, which is fine. That's good. But I could say, well, it's a cosine curve. It's just shifted over. And so for that reason, when we write an equation of a curve, we're going to always write a sine and cosine version. The good news is they have a lot of similarities. So we'll start with sine in this case. So we have these values. We have a c we have to find. We have to find a with a b, and then the horizontal shift or phase shift d. And we're going to do the same for cosine. We won't write that out right now. I usually like to start by finding actually c first. C is the midline, or the axis of the wave. And if you find that, it'll help you find your amplitude. So in this case, the axis of the wave is just the x-axis. It's 0. So c is 0. Once you find your midline, then you can just count up to the max or min, and that will give you your amplitude. So if I start here and just count up 1, 2, that's 1, then I can see the amplitude is 2. So if the amplitude is 2, then A is 2. Go ahead and write down here that the amplitude is 2. Okay, so now we have C, we have A, and then we can find B. B is not related to either one of these, but that is the period. So for a period, we have to find one cycle. So let's get rid of a little bit of ink here. I usually like to start at 0 or on the y-axis, but you can start anywhere as long as you go through one full cycle. So if this curve goes up, back down, and then back up, it's made it through one full cycle. So notice that it's starting right where it began. It's going to take off going up again. So it doesn't complete. This is only half of a cycle here on the x-axis at pi over 2. We have to go all the way up and back down, and then back to the middle of the curve again. And so this period is pi. And to find b, we're going to do this thing where we do 2 pi over the period. So if you remember when you were graphing, it was the period is equal to 2 pi over b. Well, now it's 2 pi over the period is equal to b. That's because a little cross multiplication there. But 2 pi always goes on top. So b is equal to 2 pi over pi. And so b is 2. And so now we have these three pieces of information. We have c, a, and b. And these will be the same for sine and cosine. So I'm going to start writing these equations. 0 I'm just going to leave out. B is 2. And I'll leave a little space here. And then actually we'll just put it down here. The cosine curve is going to start to look the exact same way. Let's write cosine and not sine. So cosine of 2. And then now we just have to find the phase shift. So for the phase shift, this is the confusing part. With sine, we're going to start at the origin, and we are going to count just to the right to where the curve, the middle of the curve hits the axis of the wave, or the midline. And so that happens at the origin. This curve goes through the origin and up. So that is sine. I could also shift it to the right pi. It wouldn't be necessary. Or I could shift it to the left pi. All those points, you could say that's how far this shift is. But we're just going to leave it at, for sine, we'll put it right here. D is equal to 0. And so this is your sine equation. For cosine, you're going to count from the y-axis to the maximum point. So we're going to say if I'm on the y-axis up here and I count over, then I've shifted. Well, how far is that? We got to figure that out. If I look at my scale, I have pi and then pi over 2, and then half of pi over 2 would be pi over 4. So we do know that these are split into 4 equal parts, so we use that to find our tick marks if we need it. Okay, so I'm going to shift over right pi over 4, and that will give me my phase shift. And remember, with the phase shift, you do the opposite sign. So if I have, if I want to go right pi over 4, then that's negative pi over 4. And that is my cosine function. Whoops. You could check these on like Desmos or other kind of like graphing utility. Just type them in and they should be the same curve.